let's talk about the length of the ballot. Everybody agrees the length of the ballot was too long last year. We all know that. Nobody's going to argue that. But when you say what we have in this bill doesn't improve on what it used to be or doesn't get back to what it used to be, I think it's important to consider a couple things. First of all, what it used to be goes back to a statute that was passed in 2000, not 2011. It was passed in 2000. And it was another statute that had wide bipartisan support in this legislature. Senator Thrasher voted for it, Senator Lee voted for it, Senator Latvala voted for it, as well as people like Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz voted for that statute. That's when the limit was taken off of the 75 words for constitutional amendments. And it was because it was the overwhelming belief of the members of the legislature that we had a right to put constitutional amendments on the ballot and have them protected in some fashion from a final decision by the Supreme Court because of deficiencies in the summary. And we had a very important amendment that after it was passed by the voters of Florida on the death penalty was thrown off the ballot because of a perceived deficiency in the ballot summary. So that's when that law was passed. It was in effect in 2011. We passed an additional provision that said that in the future we could mandate that the entire text of constitutional amendments, including the stricken language, could be put on the ballot. Well, guess what? This bill improves that subject area in two ways. Number one, we repealed that section that would allow the entire text of the ballot to be put, or of the amendment to be put on the ballot. And secondly, we provide that the first attempt by the legislature on a constitutional amendment, as it's served up to the Supreme Court, has to be a 75-word limit. I think that's a positive improvement over the situation that we had in 2012 with regard to ballot length. Early voting hours. Had a lot of discussion about early voting hours, a lot of discussion about the Sunday before the election and what's mandatory and what's discretionary. Well, prior to 2012, for 8 years, there were 96 hours of early voting. That wasn't mandatory on the Sunday before the election. It was discretionary for the supervisor to divide up the time on both weekends and just have a total of 8 hours among both days on the weekend. So in other words, if they wanted to have that 8 hours on Saturday, it could be on Saturday. If they wanted to divide it 4 and 4, they could divide it. But it wasn't mandatory that there be early voting on the Sunday before the election. What our bill does is we go all the way to the possibility of 168 hours. A whole lot more than 96 hours, 168 hours of early voting. Same thing on early voting locations. Prior to 2012, early voting locations were restricted to city halls, public libraries, the supervisor of elections main office, and supervisor of elections branch offices if they'd been open for a year. We've added to that list the following: fairgrounds, civic centers, courthouses, county commission buildings, stadiums, convention centers, government-owned senior centers, government-owned community centers, and a bonus pick, completely to the discretion of the local supervisor. In Senator Gardner's area, we had the supervisor who wrote in and said, after the House bill came out and after they had all those government buildings, he says, you know, we've got an entire section of the county east of State Road 436 that there is no building that meets that qualification. So in this particular case, with this provision, the supervisor will be able to add a location out there, which very probably will be at the University of Central Florida, I would guess. And that gives that supervisor the discretion to add it. So I believe that we have improved the ballot length issue. I believe we have improved the number of early voting hours, and I believe that we have improved the early voting locations. You know, a few other little things we did in here is we allow people to cure. You know, a lot of absentee ballots are thrown out because people didn't sign them. There was no mechanism when they came, once they were received by the supervisor of elections, there's no mechanism for those people to cure those. Under this bill, they will now have the right to have their vote counted. And, you know, senators, I believe we've improved the situation. I'm sorry that some of our colleagues here don't think we have, but I believe we have. I believe that the situation in Florida is so much better than many other places in the country. There's 20 states in America that either don't have early voting or don't have no excuse absentee ballot voting. 20 states. And that includes places like New York, Connecticut, a lot of strongholds of the other party that I don't belong to. We don't hear a lot of complaining. We don't hear a lot of national jokes about those states. But they can't vote. You can't vote early there. 20 years ago in Florida, really the only opportunity to vote in Florida was on election day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., or if you had an excuse, a doctor's note, or some kind of an excuse acceptable to the supervisor of elections, you could vote by absentee ballot. Now, anyone can get a mail ballot. My county, 300,000 people availed themselves of that opportunity last election. Anyone can vote on election day, and anyone can vote for up to 164 hours prior to the election. I think we've got a good bill here. I don't in the least regret the work that our committee has done, and I appreciate the support and the assistance of so many of you in getting where we are today.